Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. My friend Jen over at Scrapbena Creations and I decided to do a video collaboration using Catherine Pooler's Daily Grind 6x6 paper pad. Together we made a total of 48 cards. If you've been watching my channel this year, you may have noticed I have a little bit of an obsession with coffee themed paper collections. And I still do not like the taste of coffee at all, but I love the smell. The colors in this collection are so pretty though. Look at all that pink. There are 24 sheets of single-sided papers and there's 3 of each design. The quality of the paper is really nice. It's 80-pound cardstock. And at the bottom of the paper pad, there's a list of Catherine Pooler ink colors that match with the collection. So that's really fun. We also purchased the mugshot stamp set. I love the sentiments and I know Jen did an amazing job coloring up the images. I'll also be using Honeybee Stamps Latte stamp set and also the buzzword dies. I thought those would work really nicely with the whole coffee collection. So let's go ahead and jump into my first card design. I'll be making multiple cards of each design, but I'm only going to show the process of assembling one. For this first card, I'm using a sketch from Mojo Monday. This is number 552. I will provide links for the products in the description box, along with a link to Jen's video, and I'll also link that at the very end of this video. Definitely go and check out Jen's video when you're done watching mine. And if you're new to my channel, welcome and thanks so much for stopping by. Jen and I have very different styles, although we both still really love using 6x6 paper pads. Jen is amazing at coloring images, while I'll focus more on the pattern papers. I like to use large sentiments instead of those images. If there's ephemera that goes with the collection, I'll definitely purchase that. But there isn't for this collection, and I will do just a tiny bit of coloring. Nothing amazing like Jen's though. I like using lots of pattern papers together on a card, and I'll use cardstock layers to help break up some of those busy patterns. For this card, I used the coffee bean paper for the background and layered that with a scalloped rectangle die cut. I'll be using lots of dark brown paper for my layers. For the sentiment, I've already gone ahead and stamped this out. This is "Make today so awesome that yesterday gets jealous." I think that's a really fun sentiment. I decided to do a double matted layer for that. So first on pink and then on that dark brown. With a little banner that goes off to the right underneath the sentiment, I'm just going to use some more of this solid brown cardstock. I didn't want to bring in any more pattern papers. Before I adhere it, I did put a thin foam square on the very right hand side just to keep everything at the same level. And then on the sentiment, I'll also add a few of those thin squares, little thin foam squares on the left hand side where it goes off of all of those layers. I'm using some black foam squares instead of the white. Since I have this really dark brown cardstock, I don't want to have that pop of white underneath. So the black works out really nicely. To finish off the card, I'm bringing in some of the mini heart peel-offs. These are made by Love from Lizi, and this is just the white color. One thing that's nice about the white peel-offs is you can color them with Copic markers, but I decided to keep the hearts white. So I'm just putting 3 of them on that little banner. So there is my finished card, and I was able to make 2 using this sketch. Now moving on to card design number 2. The card sketch is from MFT. This is number 494. And if you are interested in any of the sketches I show, I have all of that information on my coordinating blog post. The link is provided in the description box below, or you can simply head over to KristieMarcotte.com. For the background paper, I'm using this fun black and white pattern paper. And I decided to bring in a pop of color. So for that wider strip in the background, I'm using this coral cardstock. I'm using some black peel-offs. This is the pinstripe style. And these are made by Love from Lizi. Just putting one along the side of that cardstock. just for some contrast, and it does add a little bit of shine. I'll layer this on some black cardstock, put my card front onto a card base, and then for the oval I have the other black pattern paper. It has a bunch of different coffee words, and there's some little hearts and coffee cups on there. Layered that on another oval die cut. Before I adhere it to my card, I am adding some scrap pieces of cardstock above and below on that oval where it goes over that coral cardstock. Just trying to keep everything nice and level. And I'll just adhere that to the center of the card. Now here's where I did do some coloring. My coloring is very simple and I don't do it very often. I've already stamped out the sentiment. This is "You've Been on My Mind," and this is from the Honeybee Stamps Latte stamp set. I'm going to add those scrap pieces of cardstock where I need to level out different areas. On the mug, I put 2 thin foam squares on the handle, so it's on the right hand side. And then I'll also put 1 piece of scrap cardstock. Remove the release paper on the foam squares, add some liquid adhesive, and adhere it to the right of that sentiment. I decided to add a small black banner in the upper left-hand corner, just for a little extra detail. Then I'll also bring in the scrapbook.com glitter brush and add it to the heart on that coffee mug. So there is my finished card, and I was able to make 3 using this sketch. I really love that pop of coral color with the black and white. Now moving on to card design number 3. The card sketch is from OWH. This is number 169. I have 3 different pattern papers. The polka dot paper for the background. I have some stripe paper for that narrow strip that goes toward the bottom of the card. I'll layer that on some coral cardstock. And to add a little bit of contrast on the edge of that pattern paper, I'm using some brown mirror peel-offs in the pinstripe style. Just putting it along the edge of that pattern paper. I was able to use some of the small pieces for part of it, since you're not going to see that whole area. It's going to be covered up by the circle. So before I adhere this piece, I'm going to add a little scallop border, and I use some teal or turquoise pearlescent cardstock. Put some liquid adhesive on the back of that and adhere it to the card. For most of my cards, the cardstock layers are an additional 1/8 of an inch to the measurements listed on the sketch. Now for this card, I am adding about 1/4 of an inch more, since I wanted a wider matted layer. For this circle, I just trimmed it off on the left side so it'll be flush to the left. And I love this pattern paper. It's so sweet. It has all of the different coffee mug images that match with the stamp set. Super sweet. Put my card front onto a card base. For the sentiment, I'm using the Latte dies from Honeybee Stamps. There are 3 different dies in the set, so you can layer them all together, or you could just use the main word die. But for this card, I decided to use all those different layers. I used some of the teal pearlescent cardstock for the main word, layered that on some brown cardstock, and then again on some white shimmer cardstock. And I'm not sure if you can tell, but that very background layer has a pierced detail all around. So I really love the look of that. I'm going to pop up this sentiment using some thin foam squares. I did add a small scrap of cardstock to the very right side before I put the little foam squares, just to keep everything at the same level, since it is going to come off of that circle just a bit. I used the coordinating stamp set for the rest of the sentiment, so it'll be sending you latte warm wishes. I think that's really fun. I layered both of those on that same brown cardstock, and then I'll just adhere them to the card with some liquid adhesive. One final finishing touch, I'm adding 2 small stitched circle die cuts in the upper right hand corner. So there is my finished card, and I was able to make 3 using this sketch. Now moving on to card design number 4. The card sketch is from Queen & Company. And their sketches were designed to coordinate with their foundation dies. Although for this card, I'm going to alter it just a bit, and I didn't use any of their foundation dies. I have 2 different pattern papers, and I cut them at an angle so they'll match up together. And it's not going to be a perfect match, but I'm going to cover that up with a stitched strip die cut. I added some double-sided tape to the back of this die cut. Flip over the panel and just trim off the extra. And then I'll put my card front onto a card base. I'm leaving 1/8 of an inch of that white card base showing. For the image on the card, I'll be using the sweet little kitty cat coffee mug. Now instead of coloring it, I'll be stamping it on some solid cardstock. I'm using the Icing on the Cake ink color by Catherine Pooler. Ink that up a couple times, that's why I used my mini Misty, wanted to get a nice solid impression. I noticed the ink was staying wet just a little bit longer on this cardstock, so I decided to do some heat embossing to make sure I didn't smear the ink. I'm using the glossy clear embossing powder from Love from Lizi. So now it'll add that little extra embossed detail and some shine. I didn't purchase the coordinating dies, so I am going to just do a quick fussy cut around the edge. If I colored images more often, I probably would have purchased the coordinating dies, but most of the images on this stamp set are fairly easy to fussy cut. Before I adhere the image to the card, I'll put a few of the thin foam squares above and below where it goes over that brown stitched strip die cut. I'll also add a scrap piece of cardstock in the center so the middle of that image isn't going to sag at all. And I'll attach that using some liquid adhesive. Before I adhere the image to the card, I'll start working on the sentiment. I've already stamped it all out and layered it on some brown cardstock. It's a 3-part sentiment, so it's may your coffee be strong and your Monday be short. I put the first part of this sentiment, following this sketch, put it above that little stitch strip, and then the rest of it's going to go in the lower right hand corner. When I first had this card all laid out, I felt the sentiment and the image looked a little off balance. But by adding in some pearls, and these are from Studio Katia, I think it really brought everything together and balanced out the card. I'm putting 3 of them in the lower right hand corner around the sentiment, and then 2 of the pearls in the upper left hand corner. These are the Bora Bora Pearl Color by Studio Katia, and it matches the pattern paper perfectly. So there is my finished card, and I was able to make 3 using this sketch. My daughter loves the little kitty cat coffee mug, so I'm sure she's going to borrow that stamp set from me. For my next set of cards, I'm using the brand new Slimline Foundation die sets from Queen & Company. They have 2 different sets. I used some Shimmer cardstock for this scalloped rectangle piece, and then some solid brown cardstock for the larger rectangle piece with the rounded corners. I'm using some liquid adhesive along with some ATG just to make sure all those edges lay down flat. Sometimes with the stitch dies, those edges warp slightly. Put some ATG on the back of this piece and add it to the pink cardstock. Again, putting just a little bit of liquid adhesive. I always want to make sure my cards stay together. So this is a slimline size card. It's 3.5 inches by 8.5 inches. The rest of the cards I made in the video are American Standard A2 size, which is 5.5 inches by 4.25 inches. It's my preferred card size, but every once in a while it's fun to do a slimline card. Using another one of the Queen & Company Slimline Foundation dies, I cut out these 3 stitched circles. So I have 3 different pattern papers. I think they worked really well together. Putting some liquid adhesive on the back and adhering them to the center of this scalloped rectangle die cut. I'll be adding the sentiment more toward the right, so I decided to have that busier pattern paper on the left. I've already cut out and stamped out the sentiment. This will be Thanks a Latte. This is from Honeybee Stamps. For the latte, I use this darker pink, a light pink, and then the brown for the layers. I love pink and brown together, and with that pop of teal, this is such a fun color combination. And just for some extra detail, I cut out 2 banners, one in pink, one in brown, and I'll layer those together on the left-hand side of the card. Before I adhere that brown banner, I put a scrap piece of cardstock. Since the brown banner will go off to the right slightly, I want to keep it all level. And then a final finishing touch, I'm going to bring in the Bora Bora pearls again. This color is so pretty. I'll add 3 of them in the upper left-hand corner on the banners and 2 in the lower right-hand corner. I like to lay them out on my card first. Then I have my embellishment wand to help pick those up, and then just add a drop of liquid adhesive. And the liquid adhesive will dry clear, so if you see any white around it, you're not going to see it later. So there is my finished card, and I was able to make 4 cards using this design. Now moving on to card design number 6. The sketch is from Mojo Monday. It's number 547. At this point, I don't have a lot of full sheets of pattern paper left over. So I'm using up some of the scraps. I have the larger coffee cup paper, which I'll use for this rectangle portion of the sketch. I have some of the stripe paper that I'll put above and below. I only needed to use some small pieces since most of it will be covered up. Decided to use some of the pink holographic peel-offs. This is one of my favorite colors. It's super sparkly. I'll put it along the edge of the coffee cup pattern paper. I like to wrap the end around the back just to make sure it's not going to come off later. Next, I'll attach the 2 stripe papers, and I wanted to make sure to line up the stripes so they're the same direction. So it'll look like I used a full sheet of paper, but I didn't. I'll put some ATG tape on the back of this panel and center it between those stripe pieces. Put my card front onto a card base. I'll leave 1/8 of an inch of that white card base showing. For this strip on the left, I use some more of the coffee bean paper. I've already attached some scrap pieces of cardstock on the ends where it goes off of that coffee cup pattern paper. Put some liquid adhesive on the back and adhere it to the card. And I am following this sketch fairly closely. For the image on the card, I've already stamped this out. It's one of the coffee cups that's included on the stamp set and the little steam. So I used some Catherine Pooler inks and then a Copic marker to color in the coffee. And I'll layer that on a scalloped circle die cut. Using some solid pink cardstock for the banner. Already added that scrap piece of cardstock on the upper portion. Decided to add 1 more piece just where it's going over the peel-offs. And then adhere it to the upper right-hand corner. For this sentiment, I stamped out the word thanks. Decided to keep it fairly simple. I didn't need anything else. Then finishing touch, I'm going to use some of the mini heart peel-offs in the pink clear iridescent color. So these have the look of glitter, but not the mess of glitter. I just put 2 of them above the word thanks. So there is my finished card, and I was able to make 2 using this sketch. Even if you don't color images, you can still use those fun image stamps with some colored inks. You can do the heat embossing. There's a lot of other options. Moving on to card design number 7. At this point, I have lots of the 2-inch pattern paper scraps. So I decided to use the Stack Edges dies from Pretty Pink Posh. I'm using the scallop design. So I cut out lots of different pieces using the pattern papers that I have left over. I have a piece of cardstock. I covered it with ATG tape, and now I'll start adding all those scallop pieces. So I try to start with either the top or the bottom. Make sure to get it nice and straight. Then you can just grab another piece and start stacking them together. I alternate colors and designs so it has a fairly balanced look. I always end up with a small area where it won't fit a full piece. So you can see at the bottom there's those little triangles. So the ATG tape seems to not be strong enough for those teeny tiny areas. So I'm just putting some liquid adhesive down first, and then I'll put my last piece in place. Then I'll flip that whole panel over, take my scissors and cut along the edge of the white cardstock. And whenever I do this style, I use either 100 or 120 pound white cardstock. That way it's easy to run the scissors along the edge and not accidentally cut the pattern paper where you don't want to cut it. So there I have that full panel. This is always so much fun. To add a little extra detail, I'm using the brown mirror peel-offs in the pinstripe style, and I'm running one along the outside edge. I'll have it hanging off the edge just a little bit, and then I'll be trimming that off here in a moment. I'm using the medium width peel-off. There's 3 different sizes with the pinstripe style. Once I have the final peel-off in place, I'll grab my craft knife and miter the corners together so I create this frame. So just taking the very tip of the craft knife and pressing it into the corner. And then I'll pull away those extra pieces. So one final corner. I love this look, and it adds that really lovely shine since I use the mirror peel-offs. I'll layer this panel on some dark brown cardstock and then add my card front onto a card base. I'll leave that 1/8 of an inch of the white card base showing. I love finding ways to use up the last of the pattern paper scraps. And this die is so fun since you can add multiple pattern papers together, and it has that fun stitch detail along the edge. I cut out a brown cardstock tag from a pretty pink Posh die, adding some pink and white twine. I put a small glue dot underneath the twine on the front just so it won't pull away later. And I'm also adding some double-sided tape to the back side of that twine. And I'll trim off the tails. I guess you can call them the tails. I am keeping that longer piece, and I'll tie a bow with it. Although it's not a very long piece, so I'm not going to tie a very large bow. But first I'll add some foam dimensional tape to the back side of this tag. And I'm using the thicker Scotch tape. Make sure to get solid coverage so there isn't one area that sags at all. Although this brown cardstock is fairly thick. It's from Basil. So here I'll tie my tiny little bow with that last scrap of twine. I'll put a small glue dot on the back of it and attach it to the front of the tag, just for some extra detail. For the sentiment on the card, I'll be using the Latte die and stamp set from Honeybee Stamps. So I've already attached the 3 layers for the word Latte. That background layer, I use some white shimmer cardstock, then I have pink cardstock for the middle layer. For the word Latte, I use some tan pearlescent cardstock. So it has a really lovely shimmer. I'll glue down the rest of the sentiment using some liquid adhesive, just attaching it above the word Latte. I'll put my acrylic block on top. Since I have that shimmer paper for the background, it takes just a little bit longer for the glue to adhere. And to finish off the card, bring in some more of the Bora Bora pearls. I'll put 2 of them in the upper left-hand corner and 3 in the lower right-hand corner. Really just ties together the pink, teal, and browns. So there is my finished card, and I was able to make 3. One of them I did the black and white with the pop of pink. On the black and white card, I used some black glitter paper for the word Latte and some pink iridescent peel-offs for that little frame. So here is currently what I have left over. Not a whole lot, but still make a few more cards. So moving on to card design number 8. This is a sketch from MFT. It's number 429. I cut out an assortment of triangles using a triangle die set from Paper Rose. I have 4 different sizes of triangles. For For the background paper, decided to keep it simple with some light pink cardstock. And following this sketch fairly closely, I'll start attaching all of the triangles in place. Now I am adding a couple extra triangles. The scraps of the coffee bean pattern paper were too small for that third size triangle. So I cut some smaller triangles instead. Thought it would be nice to bring in some more of that brown color. When I make cards like this where I'm using a die and just finishing off the last scraps, I don't really keep track of how many pieces I'm cutting out. I just start cutting out an assortment of triangles. I've done circles and little squares before, so I did end up with just a few extra pieces. It does get challenging if you have a direction specific pattern like the little coffee mugs, so it'll make a difference where you're going to place it on your card. For the sentiment on my card, I decided to stamp it directly onto that pink cardstock background. I put it in my mini MISTI so I could ink it up several times, like to get a nice solid impression, using the same sentiment as I believe it was the first card. If you're going to rise, you might as well shine. The sentiment just fit perfectly between all those triangles. I'll put my panel onto some dark brown cardstock. I was trying to be careful, I didn't want to smudge that ink. I don't think it was actually wet, but just trying to make sure. Put my card front onto a card base. And for the image on the card, I've already stamped and colored this out. This is that same first mug. For the heart, I used some of the polka dot pattern paper scraps and paper pieced it and just glued it together. I also added some glossy accents to the coffee. That way it has more of a liquid look. Finish up the card adding some more of the Bora Bora pearls. I'll put 2 of them in the lower right-hand corner and 3 in the upper left-hand corner. And just for a little extra sparkle, I'm using the glitter brush and adding it to the heart on the coffee mug. Never have too much sparkle. So there is my finished card, and I was able to make 4 with all those leftover pieces. I think this was a really fun design, and if you're good at cutting triangles, you could do it freehand. I did use a triangle die set though. Here are all the leftover pattern paper scraps. Other than this black and white pattern paper, I really didn't have very many left. And I was struggling what to do with that black and white paper since most of the images or sentiments were cut in half. So I decided to finish it there. I still added them to my scrap box of the year. I'm collecting all of the pattern paper scraps from my paper pad videos, and at the end of the year I'm going to attempt to make a few more cards. I usually have a count of how many solid sheets of cardstock I use, but I accidentally put them away before I could count them, and I also forgot to write down what colors I used. I did end up making 24 cards using Catherine Pooler's Daily Grind 6x6 paper pad. And it's so fun, Jen also made 24 cards as well, although our cards are completely different. Now don't forget to go and check out Jen's video. I have it linked at the end of this video and also in the description box below. I always have so much fun doing collaborations with my friend Jen. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.